Hello, everyone. Can everyone see my screen? Hopefully, yes. So I'm delighted to be presenting to you this afternoon the Poverty Watch 2020 report, which is one-of-a-kind work based on the poverty watches of our national networks and our European organization members. I will first introduce the Poverty Watch 2020 report itself. Then I will talk about the trends in poverty and social exclusion revealed by the report. Then I will touch upon the impact of COVID in the past year. Then I will talk about the challenges and priorities highlighted by our networks and European organizations. And I will finish with main messages and recommendations derived from the report. So first of all, what is the Poverty Watch and what is it not? It is not a comprehensive academic report. It starts from the reality of people experiencing poverty and the perspectives of NGOs that support and work with them. It aims to monitor key trends and policy on poverty and social exclusion. It aims to raise awareness, and it aims to propose concrete recommendations, as Ms. Franzen said, to feed in to the decision-making process. We received 28 poverty watches last year from our national networks and European organization members, and the report is based on their work. It's a synthesis of their work. 2020 was not a normal year. So apart from the overall assessment of poverty trends and social exclusion trends, we have a priority thematic focus on the COVID response. It is very obvious from the report that the EU is at a turning point. Either we prioritize measures against poverty, or we allow poverty to rise to unimaginable and unacceptable levels, thereby supercharging poverty. So what is happening with poverty and inequality? According to 2019 data, so even before COVID, we had around 92 million people at risk of poverty. That is nearly 1 in 5. And based on the Commission's forecasts, this could rise to 125, 130 million people as the effect of COVID takes place. Poverty is a multidimensional concept. It impacts different people in multiple ways. It is experienced as a series of lacks or deprivations of things that other people consider as normal. And not all groups face the same risk. We can see some of the groups, the vulnerable groups mentioned on this slide, but I draw your attention that the list is not exhaustive here. In the EU context, there is a widening gap between richer and poorer member states. 1 in 3 people is at risk of poverty in Bulgaria, Romania, and Greece. A job is not always out of the way out of poverty either. As Ms. Franzen raised as well, 1 in 10 workers in the EU is working yet poor. In the Commission's estimate, social benefits play a crucial role, reducing poverty by nearly a third. However, there is still a long way to go to eradicate poverty. There are 4 main findings I would like to highlight in the COVID context. First of all, the crisis exposed the decline of the welfare states that were already weakened from the 2008 crisis and the following austerity responses and budget cuts. This is underlined by the increased demand for essential services for food and basic needs in the EU. For example, there is a massive increase in the use of food banks across the EU. Poverty is being supercharged. People who are already poor or belonging to vulnerable groups face the greatest risk of having their situation become worse during this crisis. Inequalities are also deepened due to the new costs and the loss of services, such as the increased heating and lighting costs since we are confined to our homes, the lack of computers for children learning from home, the homeless shelters being closed, or the free school meals not being provided because the schools are also closed. The longer-term impact of the crisis does not only harm the economy, but actually the health and the social inclusion of people experiencing poverty. An additional finding coming from these reports is that anybody can become poor. There are new groups of people pushed into poverty highlighted by the poverty watches. For example, the so-called NEETs, young people who are not in education, employment, or training. There is a strong consensus from the different poverty watches highlighting two main themes. One of them is the gaps in ensuring basic social and economic rights to a decent income, quality jobs and services such as housing, education, health and care, energy, and social protection for all. And there is a lack of personalized, comprehensive support, where NGOs have to fill the gap, who are themselves threatened by funding cuts and other issues that I will mention later. So we have 10 key messages derived from the report. The first is that poverty is a violation of human rights driven by inequality, and it is a political choice. It is caused primarily by structural inequality in the distribution and redistribution of income and wealth. Therefore, it requires a political response. COVID-19 pandemic is also exacerbating existing inequalities. It hits the poor and the most excluded the hardest, and also pushes new people and new groups into poverty. There's also a widening gap between rich and poor in terms of regions and countries as well. We see also that governments are prioritizing business instead of protecting people in this crisis as well. There is increased income support available occasionally, but it is temporary, inadequate, and it fails to guarantee income for all. We see an increasing number of poor workers that fall outside of the support measures. These precarious workers are some of the biggest victims of this crisis. We also see that the majority of essential workers are poorly paid, and women and minorities are disproportionately overrepresented in such essential jobs like retail, health, and social services. Minimum income and social protection also fails to protect people from poverty. Despite welcome temporary increases in levels or coverage, many are left without income. The pandemic has also exposed inequalities in terms of health and the lack of access to affordable health and care. We see it is highlighted by the reports that poverty is indeed a key social determinant in terms of access to health. Then there is a lack of affordable housing, and rising energy, food, and other essential costs are forcing people into unacceptable choices, such as people need to choose between food, heating their homes, or buying other essentials. The COVID-19 pandemic is also increasing inequality in education and lifelong learning systems through digital exclusion. I mentioned earlier the shortages of computers and the lack of internet access that leave poor and vulnerable children and young people behind, thereby contributing to the transmission of poverty within the family. The crisis is also exposing the need for all policy proposals to have a clear social impact assessment. It is missing in the Green Deal and it is missing in the digital transition proposals. We are hopeful but skeptical about the national recovery and resilience plans. Concerns arise, therefore, that recovery instruments will not only not benefit the poor, but they risk generating increased poverty, and that austerity will again be the main tool to recuperate these public deficits and debts. And finally, social NGOs and the community sector offer a lifeline to people facing poverty, but they themselves are overstretched and they are under threat. The demands have increased for their services, yet they find that their funding is delayed or cut, or the requirements are changing. They are also sometimes rejected as key partners in certain countries, which is often a sign of wider attacks on democracy. Finally, the Poverty Watch report leads to several recommendations on the EU level. You can find these in detail and expanded in the report, which if you register to the conference, you should have gotten by email, but it will be available on our website as well. So these recommendations range from short-term remedies to a long-term strategy parenting social rights, including an ambitious action plan for the European social pillar and poverty-proof recovery and resilience plans. A new EU anti-poverty strategy with clear and ambitious poverty targets, a recommitment to the right to a decent income, as well as to the right to quality, affordable services, a socially just Green Deal that doesn't leave anyone behind, as von der Leyen mentioned or promised, committed, and a strengthened role for participation of people experiencing poverty and NGOs in the decision-making process. So this was a short overview only of the findings of the Poverty Watch 2020 report. I encourage you to look at the report and read it further, and to look at the national networks and European organizations specific reports also available on our website. And in the following presentations, we will hear more specifics from national networks and one European organization on certain subjects I also raised and more specificities. And of course, we are curious to see what the Commission's reaction to the report is. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anna, for your